There are some kinds of heartbreak that don't arrive with a loud goodbye. They arrive in silence, a phone that never rings, a message that never gets answered, holidays that suddenly feel smaller than they used to. And perhaps one of the hardest questions a parent can carry is this: how did we get here? If you've ever found yourself asking that question, I want you to know something before we go any further. This conversation isn't about deciding who's right or who's wrong. It's about making room for a truth that many families struggle to hold at the same time. Love can exist, and so can pain. Good intentions can exist, and so can wounds that never had the chance to heal. Over the years, I've learned that when relationships break apart, our first instinct is often to search for certainty. We want a simple explanation because uncertainty is uncomfortable. But families are rarely simple. Human relationships are layered, shaped by memories, expectations, misunderstandings, and experiences that different people can remember in profoundly different ways. And if we're willing to stay curious instead of rushing to judgment, we may discover that understanding begins long before reconciliation ever does. Every silence has a story. One of the hardest things for us to accept is that silence is rarely empty. We tend to think of silence as the absence of something, the absence of conversation, the absence of phone calls, the absence of birthdays celebrated together or holidays spent around the same table. But silence, especially in families, is often carrying the weight of words that never felt safe enough to be spoken. When an adult child chooses to go no contact, it's understandable that many parents experience it as a sudden event. It can feel like a door closed without warning. One day, communication exists. The next, it doesn't. And because our minds are wired to search for explanations, we often ask, what happened? But the more difficult and perhaps more honest question might be, what happened over time? I've spent enough time listening to people's stories to know that life-changing decisions are rarely made in a single moment. More often, they're made in hundreds of small moments. Moments when someone felt dismissed instead of understood. Moments when conflict was avoided instead of repaired. Moments when vulnerability was met with defensiveness rather than curiosity. On their own, those moments may not seem significant. Together, they can slowly reshape the way a person experiences a relationship. That doesn't mean every family story follows the same path. It doesn't mean every decision to step away is free from complexity. Human relationships are far too complicated for simple conclusions. There are situations involving trauma, addiction, mental illness, manipulation, or ongoing conflict. There are also situations where people carry different memories of the very same events. Families are complicated because people are complicated. What research continues to remind us is that emotional safety matters. We all need relationships where we believe our experiences can be expressed without fear of being dismissed or ridiculed. When people repeatedly feel that their emotions have no place in a relationship, they sometimes begin protecting themselves in the only ways they know how. For some, that protection looks like creating distance. Now, if you're listening as a parent, this may be incredibly painful to hear. And I want to be careful here because pain has a way of convincing us that we're being accused when what we're actually being invited into is reflection. Reflection isn't about assigning blame. It's about making space for questions we may have been too afraid to ask. Sometimes we assume that if we never intended to cause harm, then harm couldn't have happened. But relationships don't operate on intention alone. They are shaped by impact. We can love someone deeply and still misunderstand what they needed from us. We can work tirelessly to provide for our family while unintentionally overlooking the emotional connection they were quietly longing for. Those realities can exist side by side. And acknowledging that doesn't erase love, it simply makes room for honesty. There's another truth that deserves our attention. Many parents carry their own unhealed stories. They raise children while navigating wounds. They never had the opportunity to process themselves. They repeated patterns they inherited, not because they wanted to pass on pain, but because those patterns were the only language they had ever been taught. Understanding that context doesn't excuse harmful behavior, but it does remind us that compassion becomes possible when we recognize that every generation is shaped by the one before it. So before we rush to label silence as rejection or betrayal, perhaps we can become curious enough to ask what that silence has been trying to say all along, because every silence has a story. And sometimes listening to that story with humility is the first step toward understanding whether reconciliation comes or not. Love and hurt can exist at the same time. I think this may be one of the most difficult truths any family will ever have to wrestle with, because our minds naturally want to divide people into simple categories. We want someone to be either loving or harmful, caring or careless, right or wrong. Simplicity feels safer than complexity. But real relationships almost never fit into those neat boxes. The truth is, someone can love you deeply and still hurt you. And someone can carry wounds from that relationship while never doubting that love existed. Those two experiences can live side by side, even when they seem to contradict each other. That's difficult for many of us because we often confuse intention with impact. We tell ourselves, I never meant to hurt them. And I believe that. Most parents don't wake up hoping to create distance between themselves and their children. Most are doing the best they can with what they know, carrying responsibilities, pressures, and sometimes emotional burdens that no one else ever saw. But here's what I've learned after listening to countless stories about relationships. The absence of harmful intent doesn't automatically erase painful impact. Think about that for a moment. If you accidentally step on someone's foot, your intention wasn't to cause pain, but their foot still hurts. The pain doesn't disappear simply because your heart was in the right place. Healthy relationships aren't built by arguing over whether harm was intended. They're strengthened when both people become willing to acknowledge what was experienced. This is especially true inside families because family relationships carry enormous emotional weight. A passing comment that one person forgets by the next morning might become a defining memory for someone else. A child doesn't experience words through the lens of adulthood. They experience them while they're still learning who they are, what they're worth, and whether the people they depend on truly see them. Developmental psychology has shown us something incredibly important. Children don't simply remember what happened to them. They also remember how consistently they felt emotionally safe, emotionally valued, and emotionally understood. Those experiences quietly shape the beliefs they carry into adulthood about themselves and about relationships. That doesn't mean parents are responsible for every painful feeling their children ever have. Life simply doesn't work that way. Every person eventually becomes responsible for their own healing, but acknowledging that doesn't remove the importance of recognizing the influence our relationships have on one another. I also think we need to offer ourselves a little compassion here, because every parent enters parenthood with their own unfinished story. None of us are raised by perfect people. We inherit ways of communicating, responding to conflict, expressing affection, or avoiding difficult emotions. Often we don't even realize we're repeating those patterns until someone we love experiences them differently than we intended. And that realization can bring up shame. Shame whispers, if I made mistakes, then I must be a terrible parent. But shame is rarely a good teacher. It tends to shut conversations down instead of opening them up. Growth begins somewhere entirely different. Growth begins when we're able to say, I loved as best I knew how, and maybe there were moments when my best wasn't what someone else needed. That sentence doesn't erase love. It actually honors it, because real love isn't afraid of honesty. Real love is willing to grow. Perhaps that's why this conversation is so challenging. It's asking us to hold two truths without letting go of either one. To believe that love was real while also making room for the possibility that pain was real too. Those truths don't cancel each other out. In many families, they are simply parts of the same story. And when we stop treating those truths as enemies, we create space for something that wasn't possible before. Understanding. Curiosity is braver than defensiveness. When someone we love tells us that we've hurt them, something happens almost instantly inside us. Before we've even had a chance to think, our minds begin building a case. We remember everything we did right. We explain what they misunderstood. We replay the sacrifices we made. We start reaching for evidence that proves we were trying our best. And if we're honest, that's a very human response. Defensiveness isn't usually born from arrogance. More often, it's born from fear. Fear that we've failed, fear that we've been misunderstood, fear that if we admit we caused pain, we'll have to carry the unbearable weight of believing we're unworthy of love or respect, so we protect ourselves. The problem is that protection often comes at the expense of connection. I've noticed that some of the strongest relationships aren't the ones where people never hurt each other. They're the ones where both people eventually become willing to ask a simple but courageous question. Help me understand what this was like for you. That question changes everything. It doesn't mean we immediately agree with every memory or every interpretation. Human memory is complicated. Two people can walk through the same experience and remember it differently years later. That's part of being human. But understanding someone isn't the same thing as surrendering your own experience. It's choosing to become genuinely interested in theirs. Psychologists sometimes talk about the difference between listening to respond and listening to understand. Most of us think we're doing the second one, when in reality we're preparing our next explanation while the other person is still speaking. We hear enough to defend ourselves, but not enough to truly understand what they're trying to tell us. Curiosity asks something entirely different. It asks us to pause, to become less interested in winning the conversation and more interested in learning something we couldn't see before. That kind of curiosity takes courage because it requires uncertainty. It means admitting maybe there's a part of the story that I don't fully understand, and uncertainty is uncomfortable. Our brains love certainty because certainty creates the illusion of safety. If I'm completely convinced that I'm right, I don't have to wrestle with difficult questions. I don't have to examine old patterns. I don't have to revisit painful memories. Certainty lets me stay exactly where I am. Curiosity, on the other hand, asks me to move. It asks me to sit with discomfort long enough for understanding to grow. Sometimes people worry that becoming curious means accepting blame for everything. It doesn't. Curiosity isn't about taking responsibility for someone else's choices or emotions. It's about creating enough emotional space for another person's experience to exist without immediately trying to erase it. Think about the conversations that have made you feel safest in your own life. Chances are they weren't the conversations where someone rushed to prove you wrong. They were the conversations where someone stayed present long enough for you to feel heard. That kind of listening is incredibly healing because it communicates something deeper than agreement. It communicates respect. And respect has a remarkable way of lowering defenses on both sides. Of course, curiosity doesn't guarantee reconciliation. Sometimes relationships remain fractured despite our best efforts. Sometimes the other person isn't ready for conversation or the wounds run too deep for immediate repair. But even then, curiosity changes us. It softens the places where certainty had become rigid. It replaces assumptions with humility. It reminds us that every person is carrying a story we may never fully know. If we're hoping to navigate the painful mystery of family estrangement with wisdom rather than resentment, then perhaps one of the bravest things we can do is become less committed to having all the answers and more committed to asking better questions. Because understanding rarely begins with certainty. It almost always begins with curiosity. Healing begins with accountability, not blame. After we've made room for curiosity, there's another question waiting for us. It's quieter, but in many ways, it's even more courageous. It's the question that asks, what part of the story belongs to me? I know that's not an easy question. For many of us, the moment we hear the word accountability, we immediately think of blame. We imagine being put on trial. We imagine someone keeping score, pointing fingers, deciding who failed and who didn't. And if that's how we've experienced accountability in the past, It's no wonder we instinctively pull away from it. But real accountability isn't about humiliation. It's about honesty. It's the willingness to look at ourselves with clear eyes and a compassionate heart, recognizing that being imperfect doesn't make us unworthy, it makes us human. One of the things I've learned about families is that blame almost always keeps people stuck. When we're focused on proving that someone else is entirely responsible, we stop asking what we might learn. We stop growing because growth requires ownership, not perfection. Ownership sounds different. Ownership says, I may not have intended that outcome, but I'm willing to understand how my actions affected you. There's tremendous strength in that sentence because it doesn't require us to abandon our own experience. It simply asks us to acknowledge that our experience isn't the only one that matters. In healthy relationships, accountability creates safety. Think about the people you trust most. Chances are they aren't people who never make mistakes. They're people who can admit when they do. They're people who don't spend all their energy protecting their image. They spend it protecting the relationship. There's a profound difference between saying, that's not what I meant, and saying, I can see how that landed with you. The first sentence closes the conversation. The second one opens it. Research on relationships has consistently shown that repair is often more important than avoiding conflict altogether. Disagreements happen in every family. Misunderstandings happen in every family. What helps relationships endure isn't the absence of mistakes. It's the presence of genuine repair. Repair requires accountability. It requires someone to be brave enough to say, help me understand what I missed. And just as importantly, it requires the humility to resist adding the word but immediately afterward. I'm sorry you felt hurt, but I know you're upset, but that little word has a way of quietly pulling back the responsibility we had just begun to accept. It shifts the focus away from understanding and back toward defending ourselves. Real accountability doesn't erase our perspective. It simply chooses the relationship over the argument. Now, I also want to acknowledge something that often goes unspoken. Sometimes people avoid accountability because they're carrying enormous shame. They believe that admitting one mistake means their entire identity is now defined by that mistake. But shame and accountability are not the same thing. Shame says, I am the problem. Accountability says, I can become part of the solution. That's a very different conversation. When we separate our worth from our behavior, something remarkable happens. We become less afraid of difficult truths because those truths no longer threaten our identity. They simply become invitations to grow. And growth is rarely comfortable. It asks us to revisit memories we would rather leave behind. It asks us to listen without interrupting. It asks us to apologize without expecting immediate forgiveness. It asks us to accept that trust, once broken, is rebuilt through consistency rather than promises. That can feel painfully slow, but meaningful healing almost always is. Whether reconciliation happens or not, accountability still has value because it transforms the person practicing it. It softens pride into humility. It replaces self-protection with integrity. It reminds us that our greatest strength isn't found in proving we were flawless. It's found in having the courage to become wiser than we were yesterday. And sometimes that's where healing truly begins. Not with blame, but with the quiet, steady courage to take responsibility for the part of the story that belongs to us. Some questions may never have complete answers. As we come to the end of this conversation, I want to leave you with something that may be both comforting and deeply uncomfortable at the same time. Not every story ends with reconciliation. I wish I could promise otherwise. I wish every difficult conversation led to healing. I wish every apology was accepted, every misunderstanding was resolved, and every family found its way back to one another. But life doesn't always offer that kind of ending. Sometimes the phone call never comes. Sometimes the letter goes unanswered. Sometimes the silence continues far longer than anyone expected. And perhaps one of the greatest challenges we face as human beings is learning how to live with questions that don't have immediate answers. We don't like uncertainty. We want closure. We want certainty because certainty feels like solid ground beneath our feet. It tells us the story is finished, that we know what happened, and that we can finally move on. But relationships don't always give us that gift. Sometimes we have to learn how to move forward without knowing exactly how the story will end. That doesn't mean giving up. It means making peace with the fact that there are some things we can influence and other things we simply cannot control. We cannot make another person forgive before they're ready. We cannot force trust to return. We cannot rewrite yesterday, no matter how much we wish we could. What we can do is choose who we become today. That choice matters more than we often realize. If this conversation has stirred something inside you, perhaps the invitation isn't to leave here carrying more guilt. Guilt that grows without purpose has a way of becoming another burden we drag behind us. It rarely creates transformation. The invitation is something quieter. It's to become more honest, more curious, more compassionate, not only toward the people we love, but toward ourselves. Because here's another truth I've come to believe. People who are willing to grow are not people who never made mistakes. They're people who refuse to let yesterday become the final definition of who they are. Growth doesn't erase the past. It changes the future. Every conversation you approach with greater humility changes something. Every moment you choose listening instead of defending changes something. Every sincere apology offered without conditions changes something. Even if the relationship itself doesn't immediately change, you do. And that kind of transformation has a way of reaching farther than we can see. Maybe it changes another relationship in your life. Maybe it changes the way you speak to your grandchildren. Maybe it changes the way you respond the next time someone trusts you with a painful truth. Healing has a ripple effect. We often imagine healing as a destination, but I think it's much closer to a practice. It's something we choose again and again. We choose it when we tell ourselves the truth. We choose it when we resist the temptation to let pride make our decisions. We choose it when we stay open, even after disappointment has convinced us that closing our hearts would be easier. And yes, staying open is risky. There's no guarantee that openness will bring reconciliation. But there is a guarantee that closing ourselves off completely will prevent growth. Hope isn't pretending everything will work out exactly the way we want. Hope is believing that even if the outcome remains uncertain, we can still become wiser, kinder, and more courageous through the journey. So if you're carrying the weight of an estranged relationship today, maybe the next step isn't finding all the answers. Maybe it's simply asking yourself one honest question. What kind of person do I want to become regardless of what happens next? Because while we cannot always choose the ending of our story, we can always choose the integrity, humility, and compassion we bring to the chapters that are still waiting to be written. And sometimes that's where the deepest healing begins. And sometimes that's where the deepest healing begins. If today's conversation gave you more questions than answers, don't be discouraged. Some of the most meaningful growth in our lives begins with a single, honest question and the courage to stay present with it. Healing is rarely a straight path, and it almost never happens all at once. It's built one conversation, one moment of humility, and one brave choice at a time. So wherever you find yourself today, whether you're hoping to rebuild a relationship, trying to understand one that has changed, or simply learning how to carry your own heart with a little more compassion, I hope you remember this. Your willingness to grow is never wasted. Every step toward greater honesty, empathy, and understanding is a step toward becoming the kind of person who brings more healing into the world. I wish you the courage to face difficult truths with grace, the wisdom to know what you can and cannot control, and the compassion to extend kindness to both others and yourself along the way. Good luck on your journey.